Imagine a world in the Imperium of man where the sky is clear and untainted by factory smog, where gentle oceans lap against golden shores, and ancient forests sing with the calls of exotic birds rather than the roar of artillery. Picture a place where grand palaces of marble and crystal overlook manicured vineyards and gardens, and where citizens stroll in plazas of white stone under the warm light of an evening sun. In a galaxy defined by war, poverty, and fear, such visions sound like a fable. Yet these places do exist, scattered sparsely among a million worlds. They are the paradise worlds of the Imperium, often touted as the best places one could ever hope to live under the Emperor's light. But paradise, as the saying goes, is rarely what it seems. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, even utopia comes with a shadow. Are these idyllic planets truly havens of peace and luxury, the pinnacle of imperial civilization? Or are they gilded cages concealing rot and peril beneath their beauty? In this dark atmospheric exploration, we will delve into the true nature of the Imperium's paradise worlds, what they are, why they exist, and the hidden truths that lurk behind the facade of perfection. Prepare for a journey through opulence and decay, loyalty and heresy, as we uncover whether these worlds are indeed the best places to live in the Imperium, or something far more insidious. Paradise worlds, also called pleasure worlds or garden worlds, are a rare class of planet officially designated by the Imperium for their outstanding natural beauty and tranquility. Unlike the typical imperial planet, choked with industry or crammed with overcrowded hive cities, a paradise world is largely undeveloped, often intentionally kept that way. Its climate and ecology are unusually hospitable: gentle seasons, clean air, fertile soil, abundant life. Many are blessed with Earth-like environments that seem almost tailor-made for human comfort. Rolling hills of green, crystal blue lakes and seas, soft breezes carrying the scent of blossoms. These planets are the very image of a pastoral dream. What truly defines a paradise world is the absence of ugliness, at least on the surface. There are no towering hive spires belching smoke, no colossal forges pounding night and day, no endless trenches scarring the continents. If you were to view a paradise world from orbit, you might see broad swaths of untouched oceans and continents dotted sparingly with elegant estates or pristine villages. Nightfall does not reveal the vast webs of city lights like on a civilized world. Instead, only isolated clusters of illumination mark small, refined settlements. The stars above shine brightly, unhindered by pollution or haze. On the ground, one could walk for miles through ancient woodlands or along sunny coastlines without ever encountering a factory or a slum. In terms of population, paradise worlds tend to be lightly populated. Often, only a few million people or fewer inhabit an entire planet. Some have only a few thousand permanent residents outside of visiting guests. By imperial standards, this is almost nothing. For comparison, a typical hive world seethes with tens of billions of souls. But on a garden world, population is deliberately kept low to avoid spoiling the environment. There are no teeming masses of underhive workers here, no endless hab blocks. Instead, settlements are limited to small towns, luxurious private estates, and perhaps a single exquisite city known for its culture and beauty. Much of the land remains wild or carefully cultivated to preserve the aesthetics of nature. Officially, the Imperium classifies paradise worlds as a subtype of civilized world, one where natural splendor is valued over urbanization. The Adeptus Administratum, which normally demands planets exploit their resources to fuel the imperial war machine, makes a rare exception for these worlds. Rather than mining out the mountains or clear-cutting forests for timber, Such planets are consciously spared from heavy industry. In many cases, this is because the planet's greatest resource is its beauty and serenity, an intangible but highly prized commodity for the Imperium's elite. These planets are often allowed a significantly lower tithe burden, the annual imperial tax of materials, soldiers, etc., or even exempted entirely from typical tithes. After all, they produce little in the way of manufacture or agriculture on a massive scale. Instead, their export, so to speak, is the opportunity for rest and leisure they provide to important imperial citizens. To an average imperial citizen toiling in a factorum or living in a hive, the mere concept of a pleasure world might sound like a mythical paradise, a whisper of heaven in a galaxy of hells. Many will live and die without ever seeing a clear sky or an uncultivated field, let alone a place of luxury. Indeed, knowledge of paradise worlds among the masses is limited. Those who have heard of them might assume they are just stories or propaganda, for it's almost inconceivable that any imperial world could be so gentle and peaceful. And yet, from the perspective of the high lords and nobles, these worlds are very real and even necessary. The perceived utopian features of paradise worlds include outstanding natural beauty, verdant forests, serene beaches, calm lakes, majestic mountain ranges untouched by strip mining. The landscapes of paradise worlds are often described in poetic superlatives. Some are tropical idyls of eternal summer. Others might be alpine wonderlands of cool, crisp air and snow-capped peaks. Many boast unique flora and fauna found nowhere else, sometimes evolved in isolation, other times imported and curated like living artworks for the planet. It's not uncommon for exotic alien plants or docile creatures to be transplanted into a paradise world's ecosystem, provided they pose no hazard, further enhancing the wonderland feel. Every vista seems carefully composed, as if by a painter's hand. Comfortable climate. These worlds typically lack extreme weather that could inconvenience residents. No toxic ash storms or rad fog, but rather gentle rains, sunny days, refreshing breezes. The environment itself seems to cater to human life. It's said that on some garden worlds, one can sleep outdoors under the stars without fear. The temperature drops just enough to be pleasant, not deadly. This benign climate means year-round growing seasons for gardens and vineyards, and little need for the heavy protective clothing common on harsh worlds. Luxury and leisure. Paradise worlds are designed as playgrounds for the powerful. They feature luxurious resorts, hunting lodges, spa temples, opera houses, exclusive casinos, and all manner of recreational facilities, all tastefully integrated into the scenery. One might find, hidden in a secluded valley, a grand hot springs bathhouse carved from marble, where nobles rejuvenate in mineral waters, or perched on a cliff top, an opulent restaurant where chefs serve cuisines from across the galaxy under golden chandeliers. High culture thrives here. Art galleries, concert halls, libraries filled with rare volumes, all the things the upper classes enjoy and promote as marks of civilization. Unlike the crude taverns and gambling dens of a frontier world, these venues exude refinement, at least on the surface. An absence of war on the surface. Perhaps the most surreal aspect of a paradise world in the Warhammer 40k universe is the feeling of peace. These planets are typically far from any front lines and have no active battlefields. Walking through its fields, you do not hear the crack of laser gun fire or the distant thump of artillery that so many Imperial citizens consider a part of daily life. There are no armies quartered openly on the streets, and the sky is free of the constant contrails of defense fighters. On a paradise world, war feels like a distant concept, something that happens out there beyond the tranquil horizon. Of course, appearances can be deceiving, and security forces do exist. More on that later. But to a casual eye, these worlds appear almost untouched by the eternal conflict of mankind and alien. Veterans of the Imperial Guard sent to recuperate on such a planet often remark on the uncanny quiet at night. No bombing raids, no air raid sirens, only the chirp of nocturnal creatures. For some, this quiet is a luxury. For others, it's oddly disconcerting after a lifetime of strife. Minimal industry and pollution. In stark contrast to forge worlds or hives, a pleasure world's industry, if any, is subtle and small-scale. There may be artisan workshops producing fine wines, perfumes, artworks, or handcrafted luxury goods, but you will not see continent-spanning manufacturing complexes or belching smokestacks. Most heavy machinery is banned or kept out of sight. Power generation might come from hidden geothermal plants or renewable sources to avoid marring the landscape. Ground vehicles are few and tend toward the elegant. Hovercraft, silent electric conveyances, or even horse-drawn carriages for effect. The result is clear air, water you can drink from the source, and night skies where the stars are visible. Many paradise worlds are even called garden worlds because they resemble vast ornamental gardens more than typical planets, curated to be picturesque at every turn. In short, paradise worlds are the antithesis of everything we expect from life in the Imperium. They are oases of comfort in a galaxy of hardship. It's little wonder that those with power and privilege flock to them whenever they can. The official purpose of these worlds is precisely that, to serve as recreational havens for the Imperium's elite. Instead of being colonized for maximal output, they are retained in their natural state for the benefit of high-ranking Imperial servants who need a place to rest, recuperate, or indulge in civil pleasures away from the grim realities of duty. Playgrounds of the powerful. Who actually lives on or uses these paradise worlds? Largely, it is the imperial nobility and other upper echelons of society. A paradise world's population often includes a small number of permanent residents who are native to the planet. But even they often exist to service the needs of off-world visitors. The real significance of these planets is in the important guests they host. On any given paradise planet, you might find members of the great noble houses of the Imperium maintaining seasonal estates. High-ranking officials of the Adeptus Terra, the vast imperial bureaucracy, come to unwind here. Admirals of the Imperial Navy, decorated Imperial Guard generals, wealthy rogue traders flush with profit, and planetary governors from other worlds. The Navis Nobilite, the navigator families who pilot starships, also treasure these worlds as places to convalesce. Constant warp travel takes a toll on the mind, and a month spent in an idyllic estate can help a navigator recover his sanity and health. Likewise, senior members of the ecclesiarchy, the imperial church, such as influential confessors or cardinals, may keep retreat villas on paradise worlds where they ostensibly go to meditate on holy matters, even if in reality they might be sipping wine on a balcony overlooking a sunset. Even chartist captains, merchants commanding trade ships, or wealthy guildmasters might vacation here if they can afford it. In some cases, rogue traders, those freewheeling explorers with imperial warrants, actually own entire pleasure estates or even whole paradise planets, using them as private fiefdoms to host extravagant parties or negotiations with fellow elite. Imagine a rogue trader lord throwing a month-long masquerade ball in a jungle palace, entertaining allies and rivals alike with rare delicacies and strange off-world performers, all against the backdrop of a lush, alien paradise. Such decadence is very real on these worlds. Paradise worlds are often deliberately cultured places. Since heavy labor and industry are minimal, a large portion of the population may be employed in the arts or entertainment. Musicians, painters, sculptors, poets, chefs, dancers, all can find patronage on a pleasure world, supported by noble funds to make life more splendid. Entire conservatories and academies might be founded to train artisans and performers in classical techniques. The results adorn the mansions and public spaces, murals, fountains, statues, orchestral performances under the open sky. The planet itself becomes a stage for human achievement, or at least the nobility's notion of it. One could attend a grand opera in a tropical amphitheater one evening, then witness a fireworks display over the ocean, followed by a lavish masquerade ball in a glass-domed arboretum, the itinerary of a typical imperial governor's holiday. For the ultra-wealthy, every whim can be satisfied on a paradise world. Hunting expeditions are common, with dangerous beasts sometimes imported from other planets, just so the nobles can test their marksmanship on exotic prey. There are rumors of planets that essentially function as vast game reserves. Nobles bring species from across the galaxy to stocked wildernesses, then hunt them for sport across landscapes deliberately left wild. Falconry with cyber-augmented hawks, horseback riding through perfumed orchards, or even deep-sea diving in crystal-clear waters to gather rare pearls. All manner of leisure pursuits take place here. Crucially, paradise worlds are also used as recuperative and training sites for favored servants of the Imperium. A famous example: some space marines and Imperial Guard units maintain secluded compounds on paradise worlds where warriors can train their bodies and minds for war in peace. It might sound paradoxical, but the serene environment allows elite fighters to focus on discipline, martial arts, and battle philosophy without distraction. Ancient scrolls of strategy are studied in quiet libraries. Duels and sparring matches are held in sun-dappled courtyards or on open fields rather than grim barracks. The idea is that by touching paradise, a warrior steels himself to defend it, remembering what peace feels like and thus why they fight. There are tales of chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, who periodically send squads to a Garden World monastery to meditate and center themselves, honing their deadly skills amidst beauty so that they do not succumb to bloodlust or madness. Even assassins and inquisitors have been known to take short retreats on paradise planets to clear their minds, though always remaining vigilant. For high-ranking officers or officials suffering the psychological trauma of endless war, the Administratum sometimes prescribes a stay on a pleasure world as a recovery assignment. There they can heal from wounds, physical or mental, in a gentle environment. There are sanatoriums and hospices set up on some of these worlds operated by the Orders Hospitalier, healer nuns of the Adeptus Arbites, or other medical elites, where thousands of patients might be tended in peace. For example, one paradise planet hosts the Asylum of St. Vero, a colossal hospital complex treating over 1 million troubled minds under the watch of dedicated sisters. Surrounded by calm seas and soft breezes, the mentally scarred are given therapy and care far from the stress of hive life. It speaks volumes that the Imperium, normally so callous with human life, deems the atmosphere of these worlds valuable enough to aid recovery. A tacit admission that not everyone can endlessly endure the grind of grim life without a break. The Imperial tithe, tax for paradise worlds, is usually very low or even formally non-existent. Many are listed with special statuses such as colony exemption or given leeway as long as they serve their function as resorts. This is a deliberate policy. The Imperium forgoes immediate material gain from these planets to reap long-term benefits of having rested, sane leaders and exemplars who can return to their duties at peak performance, in theory at least. In exchange for protection by Imperial fleets and armies, the Paradise World offers its idyllic locales to those deemed worthy. In a way, these planets are a prestige investment symbols that the Imperium can afford beauty and culture, not just endless consumption and war. They are like jewels in the imperial crown, rarely seen by the masses but upheld as proof that human worlds need not all be hellish. Of course, one shouldn't get the idea that anyone can simply travel to a paradise world for a vacation. Access to these worlds is tightly controlled. Most are private or require high authority clearance. They're often owned or governed by influential aristocratic families or by the Administratum itself. Some paradise planets were even directly chartered by imperial decree for the use of specific groups. For instance, an entire world gifted to a celebrated general upon retirement, or a planet set aside as a retreat for members of the sector governor's court. In these cases, visiting without invitation is strictly forbidden and likely impossible. Defense systems will turn away unauthorized ships, and the planet's officials will have you arrested or quietly removed if you somehow land without permission. Indeed, though they may not bristle with obvious fortifications, paradise worlds are not defenseless. The Imperium goes to great lengths to shield its paradises from harm, knowing how rare and valuable they are. System defense fleets and orbital pickets often guard these systems. It's not unusual for a paradise world to be located in the heart of well-patrolled Imperial space, far from frontier danger. Some are near segmentum capitals or within highly developed sectors where multiple Imperial Navy bases are nearby. Others have their own planetary defense force, PDF garrisons, perhaps smaller than on a war-torn world, but elite in equipment, ready to respond to any incursion. These defense forces might dress in ceremonial finery when on parade to match the world's splendor, but make no mistake, they will unleash deadly force if the peace is threatened. On certain pleasure planets, even the space around the planet bristles with hidden weapons. Defense lasers camouflaged as statues on a moon or a ring of orbital mines at the system's edge, ensuring any would-be raiders are blown out of the void before they get close. The people who benefit from these worlds have enormous influence, and they are keen to ensure their playgrounds remain safe and undisturbed. Woe betide the foolish pirate or chaos marauder that attempts to ransack the Emperor's personal gardens. Retaliation will be swift and overwhelming. In summary, paradise worlds serve a clear societal purpose. They are the sanctuaries and pleasure gardens for the Imperium's ruling class and chosen heroes. They show that amid a civilization defined by total war and sacrifice, a slice of utopia is preserved, if only for those deemed to have earned or inherited the privilege. To the lucky inhabitant or guest, life on such a world is as close to heaven as one can find in the Imperium. But for all these wonders, there is a deeper question we must ask. At what cost does this paradise come, and what realities lie beneath its shining surface? A stark contrast to the rest of the Imperium. To truly appreciate the unique nature of paradise worlds, one must contrast them with the far more common types of imperial planets. This is a galaxy-spanning empire, and most of its domains are anything but paradisiacal. By looking at how paradise worlds differ from others, hive worlds, forge worlds, agri worlds, and more, we understand just how much of an anomaly they are and why that anomaly is both treasured and resented. Hive worlds. These are the most populous planets in the Imperium, each hosting dozens of massive hive cities, housing tens or hundreds of billions of people in towering arcologies. Life on a hive world like Necromunda or Armageddon is the polar opposite of life on a pleasure planet. Instead of open skies and greenery, hive citizens live under perpetual smog and in artificial light, often never seeing a real sunrise or feeling clean rain. The air is a chemical soup the water recycled and often tainted. Noise is constant, the clanging of manufactoria, the hum of machinery, the din of billions living atop each other. Overcrowding, pollution, crime, and drudgery define the hive experience. People eat nutrient paste or corpse starch rations and work 18-hour shifts in factorums or in endless queues. By comparison, a paradise world's silence and spaciousness would be utterly alien to a hiver. On a paradise world, you might hear birdsong in the morning instead of sirens. A hiver might break down in tears at the sight of an open meadow after a lifetime in steel corridors. Indeed, it's said that some hive-born Imperial guardsmen, when rotated to a paradise world for leave, at first find the wide horizons and fresh air terrifying. Agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces, strikes them because they've never experienced it. Imagine an underhive scummer from a polluted city seeing a clear blue ocean for the first time. It would be like stepping into a dream. This contrast underscores how profoundly privileged Paradise World residents are, and why the existence of such worlds might even be kept quiet from the general populace, so as not to foment discontent or unrealistic hope. Forge worlds. These are domains of the Adeptus Mechanicus, planets turned into gigantic factory complexes devoted to producing weapons, machines, and technology. A forge world like Mars or Risa is essentially one giant smoking workshop. The surface is usually covered in blackened foundries, cooling towers, pipelines, and the bizarre Gothic factories of the machine cult. Day and night are meaningless under the glow of furnaces. Toxic waste and radiation are common byproducts. Often, the sky is stained bizarre hues by chemical reactions. On such worlds, nature has usually been completely subjugated or eliminated, if any remains at all. Native fauna and flora, long dead or kept in stasis vaults, as curiosities. People live as cyber-augmented technicians and servitors, toiling with little concern for comfort or aesthetics. A paradise world, by contrast, might have no visible industry whatsoever. If any manufacturing is done, it's hidden in artisanal workshops or small, non-polluting facilities out of sight. There are no legions of servitors clanking around publicly, and no colossal Titan robot forges shaking the ground. Instead of the red haze of smog and constant machine clatter, a paradise world's ambient sound might be waves on a beach and the breeze in the pines. To a tech priest of Mars, a paradise world might seem an appalling waste. All those resources and land left idle, not a macroprocessor or plasma reactor in sight. Indeed, there have been quiet conflicts where the Mechanicus coveted a paradise planet for its mineral wealth or ancient tech, but were overruled by the Imperium's decree to preserve the planet's surface. Such resentment can simmer under the surface, the lords of industry eyeing the untouched mountains, full of ore that they are forbidden to mine. Agri worlds. These are planets dedicated to agriculture, growing crops, and raising livestock to feed other worlds. At first glance, an agri-world might sound pleasant. Lots of farms, countryside, relatively low population, perhaps almost like a paradise world. But the reality is quite harsh. Agri-worlds are essentially gigantic monocultures, endless fields of the same crop, harvested by indentured farmers or vast harvesting machines. The goal is mass production of food, not quality of life. So, while there might be less pollution than a forge world, the lifestyle for human workers is grueling. Dawn to dusk labor in fields, simple living conditions, and heavy quotas to meet the Imperium's demands. Often, agri-worlds don't get to enjoy the fruits of their own harvest. The best yields are shipped off to feed hive populations or the Imperial Guard, while local folk subsist on thin gruel or second-grade produce. In contrast, a paradise world does have agriculture, but usually in the form of boutique crops, luxurious vineyards producing fine wines, orchards of rare fruits, estates that breed high-quality groks, cattle, for gourmet meats, and so on. The scale is small, the emphasis on luxury and variety rather than bulk export. And crucially, the local population on a paradise world might actually enjoy the produce they cultivate rather than shipping it all off. A vintner on a pleasure planet will taste their own excellent amasec. A farmer on an agri world might never get to sip the top-tier wine he helps grow, as that is reserved for export. Additionally, agri-worlds can have brutal weather if they're terraformed only for production, and often lack the social richness of paradise worlds. You won't find opera houses on a basic farm world, nor nobles throwing balls. The population of an agri-world is usually mostly peasant farmers and tech adepts running processing plants. So while both agri and paradise worlds are green in their way, one is a breadbasket for the Imperium's survival, the other a pleasure garden for the Imperium's elite. One might feed billions, unseen, off-world, while its own people live simply. The other feeds only a few, but those few dine in unimaginable splendor. Feral and death worlds. Some imperial planets remain mostly wilderness not out of choice, but because they are extremely dangerous or not suited to development. Death worlds are planets where everything is hostile to human life. Lethal predators, toxic jungles, active volcanoes, etc. Feral worlds are primitive and untamed, with human populations living in pre-industrial states. At first glance, such worlds might have untouched nature like a paradise world, but the key difference is safety and comfort. A death world's jungles may be lush and beautiful, but step into them and you'll likely be devoured by some monstrous carnivore or poisoned by spores. The Imperium doesn't industrialize these planets not to preserve beauty, but because it's too costly or impossible. Paradise worlds, on the other hand, are safe havens where nature, while wild in appearance, is largely harmless or controlled. Hazardous life forms are usually removed or confined to distant parts of the planet. The forests of a garden world are not crawling with catacomb devils or man-eating plants, or if they have any dangerous species, those are known and managed, perhaps only let loose in certain hunting ranges for sport under supervision. The climate on a death world might be extreme, scalding days and freezing nights, or constant radioactive storms, whereas on a paradise world it's mild. And unlike a feral world where human society is rudimentary, tribal villages in fear of the dark, a paradise world has high culture and technology, just sparsely applied. If a paradise world has any savages, they're likely imported alien beasts in a safari park, not roaming the main continent threatening people, where the people of a death world are hardened survivors just to live each day. The people of a paradise world can afford to be leisurely and carefree. Civilized worlds, the broad category that covers normal, developed planets, those with cities, industry, and an average imperial lifestyle, makes up the majority of imperial worlds. These vary widely in quality of life, but generally they have a mix of urban centers, some pollution, some nature preserved in parks or outskirts, and a middle-class existence for some of the populace. Others still live in slums, etc. A paradise world is like a specialized, extreme version of a civilized world, where the balance is entirely skewed toward luxury and environment. Many civilized worlds would have a few rich resort areas or noble estates that mimic paradise conditions, like private hunting reserves or vacation islands for the rich on that planet. But outside those enclaves, they still have factories, traffic congestion, crime, and all the usual troubles. Paradise worlds extend that enclave to the entire planet. One can think of it this way. On a typical civilized world, perhaps 5% of the surface is as lovely as a paradise, the richest districts, the governor's palace grounds, etc. And the rest is mundane or dirty. On a paradise world, they aim for 95% of the planet to remain lovely, and only a tiny fraction, maybe a hidden spaceport or a shield generator installation, reflects the harsher technological footprint of the Imperium. This stark difference creates a sense of awe and envy among those who know of paradise worlds. They truly are the Imperium's best places on a purely physical and cultural level. It also reinforces the rigid class divide. Such worlds are never intended for the common masses of humanity. They exist because the Imperium's upper crust demand a standard of living that would be impossible to grant to everyone. If every world were treated like a paradise world, the Imperium would collapse. There would be no mines or factories producing necessities, no legions of soldiers to fight, no tithe to collect. Paradise worlds are possible only because countless other planets shoulder the burden of production and war. They are a luxury that the larger Imperium supports, consciously or not. In fact, one might poetically say, paradise worlds are islands of light kept afloat on seas of suffering. For every paradise world with a pampered population of a few million, there might be 100 hive worlds each with billions of miserable workers and 1,000 war zones where guardsmen bleed and die, all directly or indirectly ensuring that paradise world remains untouched. The fine wines served at the noble's table in a garden world villa were bottled by indentured laborers somewhere. The lavish silk brocades they wear woven by hive city manufactories. The food spiced with herbs grown off-world by agri drudges. Even the security that keeps the paradise safe is paid in blood by others. Navy crews who patrol the space, soldiers garrisoned in lonely outposts, perhaps never themselves allowed a day's rest on that world they guard. This disquieting truth leads us to consider the deeper purpose and cost of paradise worlds in the political and societal tapestry of the Imperium. The purpose behind paradise politics and power. Why does the Imperium, an empire often characterized as brutally utilitarian, even allow some planets to languish in leisurely splendor when resources and manpower are desperately needed at the front lines? The existence of paradise worlds seems at odds with the Imperium's creed of sacrifice, duty, and unrelenting toil for the Emperor. Yet, in practice, these worlds serve several political and societal purposes that the Lords of Terra and other power brokers deem important for the functioning of the Imperium, or at least for their own interests. 1. Rewards and incentives. The simplest level, paradise worlds are rewards for loyalty and success. The Imperium runs on human effort and often on superhuman dedication. High officials and war heroes are still mortal men and women. They can be ground down by constant stress or tempted to betrayal if they feel only hardship is their lot. By holding out the promise of luxury and rest, the Imperium incentivizes its leaders. For example, a successful planetary governor of a hive world might be granted a week's stay at an Imperial retreat on a pleasure planet as recognition for exceeding his tithe quotas. A general who wins a major crusade could be retired with honor to a villa on a paradise world, where he can live out his remaining years in comfort instead of on another battlefield. Even inquisitors, whose work is secretive and dire, sometimes receive discreet leave on pleasure worlds to keep them from burning out or turning radical from constant darkness. This carrot of paradise helps keep the powerful loyal. They know that if they play by the rules and excel, they too might earn time in Eden. In contrast, those who fail or fall from favor will never see such rewards. It's a tool to manage the Imperium's upper-class morale. 2. Preservation of culture and sanity. The Imperium is in a permanent state of war and emergency, which has a degrading effect on human culture and mental health over millennia. Without places to nurture the finer things, humanity's spirit might wither. Paradise worlds, ironically, serve as repositories of art, knowledge, and refined culture that might be lost on worlds fully devoted to war production. Here, great libraries hold literature and philosophy that elsewhere might be neglected. Art galleries preserve masterpieces. Musicians compose symphonies. Scholars and priests debate in manicured cloisters. The Imperium needs some vestiges of higher culture to remind itself that it is the heir of a great civilization, not just a barbaric horde with laser guns. These worlds provide that environment. Additionally, they can function as neutral ground for diplomacy and strategizing. Sector governors or high-ranking admirals can meet on a neutral paradise world to discuss policy or form alliances, away from the prying eyes of their rivals and the distractions of their home territories. The tranquility of the setting might even lead to clearer minds. A strategic conference held in a quiet mountain lodge might produce wiser plans than one held in the middle of a hive riot. At least, that's the hope. The mention of monasteries and contemplative orders on paradise worlds is notable. Certain planets have entire sects of scholars, monks, or holy men who withdraw there to pray and think in peace. The ecclesiarchy, for example, might maintain a secluded abbey on a paradise world where senior clergy retreat for yearly reflection, or where a new doctrine is quietly debated before being rolled out. The presence of the Adeptus Sororitas, Sisters of Battle, in non-militant orders like the Orders Hospitaller on these worlds shows that the Imperium also leverages the calm to heal and renew. Even some of the Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, normally ascetic warriors, acknowledge that controlled moments of peace can sharpen the soul. An Ultramarines veteran may journey to a Garden World shrine to honor fallen brothers in a tranquil memorial garden, drawing strength from the beauty before returning to the void. All of this contributes to maintaining a semblance of sanity and higher purpose amid the unending horror elsewhere. 3. Political theaters and networking. If hive world courts and segmentum capitals are where formal politics happen, paradise worlds are often where informal power brokering thrives. When the segmentum commander invites various admirals, generals, and planetary governors to his daughter's wedding on a paradise estate, you can be sure more will happen there than celebration. Deals will be struck over glasses of amasec. Alliances between noble houses might be negotiated during a leisurely garden walk. Rival officials size each other up during a hunt or a fencing match at the estate. In essence, paradise worlds provide a relaxed and discreet setting for the high and mighty to conduct business away from the eyes of the masses and the stenographers of Administratum records. Many a war might have been indirectly decided by a quiet conversation on a pleasure planet veranda, long before the official orders were given. The Administratum itself sometimes uses such worlds for high-level conferences. We can imagine a scenario where tithe collectors from a dozen sectors convene at a resort to discuss adjusting supply lines, doing so in comfort to ensure tempers remain calm as they handle the colossal bureaucracy's troubles. It greases the wheels of governance. That said, there is certainly an element of corruption and exploitation here. A paradise world gathering is the perfect place for bribes to exchange hands with plausible deniability. What? It's just a gift given during a friendly stay at my estate. An ambitious sector governor might lavish hospitality on visiting lords, subtly ensuring their future support for his policies or turning them against a rival. Since these worlds are outside the daily scrutiny of, say, the local press or the average imperial citizen, not that free press truly exists, but rumors travel less when everyone present is invested in discretion, powerful figures can collude and connive as they please. In many ways, the decadent courts of the imperial aristocracy find their purest expression on paradise worlds. Here, they are free to show off their wealth and influence in a competition of one-upmanship. Who can host the grandest gala, who can offer the rarest vintage wine, whose estate's gardens are most splendid. These status games reinforce the hierarchy among the nobility and officials, and in doing so, reinforce the overall imperial hierarchy. They all acknowledge the emperor's majesty in their toasts, of course, but beneath that, it's human vanity and ambition at play. 4. Propaganda and the illusion of hope. Although knowledge of paradise worlds is limited among the masses, the Imperium's propaganda machine does occasionally allude to them. Why? Because it is useful to maintain hope and loyalty. For example, a recruitment pict for the Imperial Guard might show an image of a beautiful world with the tagline, "Fight for the Emperor and protect the paradise of humanity's future." It suggests that the soldiers' sacrifices ensure places like this can exist, even if the soldier will never personally set foot there. The ecclesiarchy might describe paradise worlds as examples of the emperor's grace, proof that righteous, peaceful life is possible under his rule, so long as the heretic and xeno threats are kept at bay. This can be a powerful motivator. Suffer now so that others, or maybe your descendants, may one day live in comfort. It is, admittedly, a distant and often hollow promise, but even a hollow promise can inspire zeal when the alternative is utter despair. In a galaxy where the average person's life is full of misery, the mere idea that somewhere out there is a world without misery can prevent total hopelessness. Of course, the dark irony is that, for the vast majority, it's an unreachable dream, a carrot on a stick that they will never taste. Yet, the Imperium thrives on such impossible ideals, like the promise of the Emperor's eventual salvation of mankind. Paradise worlds slot neatly into that narrative. They are like little glimpses of the paradise that Imperial citizens are taught awaits the faithful in death by the Emperor's side. In life, only the most fortunate or highborn get to sample it. But everyone is told that in spirit they are laboring, so humanity can one day reclaim a golden age where every world might be like these. 5. Strategic rest points and cryptic uses. On a more pragmatic note, some paradise worlds have additional roles. For the Imperial military, a paradise world can serve as a rest and refit station for fleets or regiments pulled off the front line. A battle fleet might occasionally anchor above a paradise world for shore leave, not for the common ratings perhaps. They may only see a small pleasure haven on the orbital station if lucky, but for the ship's captains and officers. The crew might get a brief respite on a designated tropical beach under supervision to raise morale before the next campaign. The officers, meanwhile, attend formal dinners planetside with local dignitaries. This practice can help maintain fighting spirit. Even the Navy's brutal discipline recognizes that humans need a break, lest they mutiny or go insane. Interestingly, due to their low population and remote nature, paradise worlds can also hide secrets. The Inquisition has been known to maintain clandestine facilities beneath the paradisiacal exterior. One example, on the paradise world of Reth, the Inquisition quietly operates a bunker called the Chapel of Blessed Peace deep below an island asylum, guarded by elite stormtroopers and psychic wards, where they send their most disturbed or tainted members for containment and study. Hiding such a grim installation on a paradise world is a calculated choice. Who would suspect that beneath a beautiful island where the wealthy vacation lies a vault of madness holding unspeakable things? Likewise, some paradise worlds might conceal vaults of forbidden knowledge or artifacts that need to be stowed away from prying eyes. A peaceful planet with few people is actually a good spot to bury something dangerous. There's less chance a random miner or colonist will dig it up, and any intruders stick out. The locals often have no idea. To them, their world is just blessed and peaceful, oblivious that somewhere in the jungle a warded cave contains, say, a chaos-tainted relic under inquisitorial seal. Additionally, high-ranking Imperial fugitives or persons under protection sometimes are hidden on paradise worlds. If a witness needs to be kept safe or a political asset needs a quiet retirement away from assassins, what better place than a remote paradise world estate under a false identity? It's as if these worlds serve as the Imperium's safe houses as well as its resorts. 6. The role of the Administratum. The Administratum, the massive bureaucracy, ultimately controls planetary classifications and tithe grades. It might seem surprising that they would ever permit a planet not to be exploited fully. In truth, behind every paradise world's status is likely a story of bureaucratic maneuvering or decree. Often, a paradise world's designation is achieved because some powerful individual or group lobbied for it. A rogue trader discovers a stunningly beautiful planet during a crusade. Instead of cataloging it for colonization or mining, he petitions the sector governor to reserve it as a private retreat, of course currying favor in the process. Or the ecclesiarchy might declare a lovely world to be sacred after some convenient vision of a saint, thus warding off Mechanicus prospectors and ensuring it remains undeveloped, while the cardinals then use it as a holiday haven. The Administratum might justify low tithes by classifying the world's primary output as something intangible like recuperative services or cultural value. Indeed, some paradise planets are noted for producing art, couture fashions, rare delicacies, or refined gentlemen and ladies, things that don't fit well into standard tithe tables, but are appreciated by the sector elite. There are documented cases of tithe exemption known as colony exemption or similar, which indicate that usual rules don't apply. These often require high-level sign-off. Essentially, the bureaucrats allow exceptions because those exceptions serve the people who oversee the bureaucrats. From another angle, a paradise world in a sector can be a point of pride for that sector's administration. It's like having a showcase world to impress visiting officials. Look at our sector. Not only do we meet our quota of tanks and troops, but we also maintain the glorious Garden of X, a testament to the Emperor's bounty. In the often cutthroat internal politics of the Imperium, being known as the governor of the sector containing a famed pleasure world might elevate one's status. Conversely, losing a paradise world to war, corruption, or reclassification could be a political black mark. Thus, Administratum adepts and governors have a vested interest in perpetuating these worlds as part of the imperial order. In summary, paradise worlds exist because the Imperium's power structure needs them to keep running effectively. They are the pressure valves and prestige projects of a vast empire. They keep the elite content, and thus loyal, provide arenas for soft power to be exercised, preserve humanity's cultural soul in small pockets, and act as symbols of what the Imperium claims to fight for. However, this lofty purpose comes hand in hand with hypocrisy and hidden troubles. The very existence of these utopias depends on massive inequality and requires willful blindness to certain truths. To say it plainly, paradise worlds are simultaneously the Imperium's greatest boast and a glaring indictment of its social order. Nowhere else is the gap between the high and low of humanity so evident as on a pleasure planet, for paradise cannot exist without a hell elsewhere to support it, and sometimes those hells creep into paradise in unexpected ways. Beneath the gilded surface, inequality and decadence. Life on a paradise world, for all its comforts, is built upon a foundation of stark social inequality. These planets may not have the vast populations of hive worlds, but they still require a society to function. And in that society, there are the served and the servers. When one walks through the immaculate marble halls of a governor's summer palace on a garden world, admiring frescoes and sipping fine amasec, one likely does not see the army of servants toiling behind the scenes to make such opulence possible. But they are there. The house staff polishing every surface till it gleams, the cooks and bakers preparing grand feasts in the kitchens below, the gardeners tending every flower bed and hedge maze across the estate, the custodians cleaning and repairing, the stable hands caring for prized grox mounts, the fisherfolk and farmers procuring fresh ingredients for the table, and countless other unseen laborers. On many pleasure planets, the bulk of the native population consists of laborers, servants, and artisans whose entire life purpose is to pamper the visitors and local nobility. They are often born into this role, inheriting positions as groundskeepers or butlers or vintners from their parents, generation after generation. In some cases, they might be relatively well treated. After all, a paradise world success depends on content staff who perform their duties with pride. But they are always second-class citizens on their own world. They live in the smaller villages or servant quarters, usually out of sight of the main resorts and palaces. Their homes, while likely cleaner and safer than an underhive slum, will be modest. A strict social code keeps them in their place. They must be courteous, near invisible, and deferential at all times to the highborn guests. If a scullery maid accidentally spills soup on a visiting noble's robe, she might be whipped or sacked in disgrace, no matter how accidental. The standards on these worlds are that high to avoid offending the powerful. Luxury requires the toil of others. It's a simple truth often glossed over during the merriment of a ball or the serenity of a spa. For every noblewoman lounging in a scented bath, there's a servant heating the water, carrying towels, testing the perfume oils for any poison, perhaps even on themselves if the house is paranoid. For every grand banquet, dozens of kitchen hands have sweated all day prepping exotic dishes, likely under a chef who will accept no less than perfection. And unlike on a forge world or hive, these servants see the pleasures they provide up close. They witness decadence firsthand while not being allowed to partake. A young attendant may pour glasses of thousand-year-old amasec for feasters, knowing that just one bottle's cost could feed his family for a year, yet he'll never be allowed a sip. One can imagine the strain this might place on the human heart, to be surrounded by paradise but only as an instrument to others' enjoyment. Some servants doubtless internalize their lot, taking pride in serving the Imperium's great and convincing themselves it's an honor. Others quietly might simmer with envy or resentment, a potentially dangerous undercurrent. Decadence is the norm among the ruling class on these worlds. Freed from the everyday struggle, many nobles and officials lose themselves in hedonistic pursuits. What might start as legitimate relaxation can easily tip into excess. Fine food and drink in abundance lead to gluttony. Fashionable gatherings turn into vanity fairs. The pursuit of art and pleasure can cross into perversion when limits are not imposed. It's said that on some pleasure planets, the nobility host season-long revels where each night outdoes the last in extravagance. Masks and costumes, endless fountains of wine, dancing and feasting till dawn, theatrical performances and elaborate games. All these amusements carry on while beyond that world's sky, the Imperium burns in war. The disconnect from reality can become profound. A planetary governor from a war-torn world might come to a paradise retreat and within weeks forget the cries of the starving in his hive city, losing himself in the arms of courtesans and the pages of poetry. The longer one stays in paradise, the more the cruel universe outside seems like a bad dream to ignore. With decadence often comes corruption of values. Surrounded by luxury, some nobles begin to see themselves almost as gods immune to consequence. They feel entitled to any whim. If a bored noble on a paradise world fancies the look of a particular servant, they may demand that person attend them in private, regardless of that servant's own will. Effectively, there is an undercurrent of forced concubinage or harassment that is simply accepted. The lords and ladies see the staff, and even the local commoners, as living furniture to be used, not as equal souls. Their wealth and influence means the normal laws don't really apply to them on these worlds. Local magistrates, or Arbites officers, are often pressured to turn a blind eye to noble misconduct, if not outright barred from interfering in high-born affairs. It's plausible that a visiting admiral could literally get away with murder on a pleasure planet, say, killing a servant in a fit of rage. And the incident would be hushed up, the body quietly disposed of, for fear of offending the admiral's powerful friends. Such injustices fester beneath the outward harmony. This social imbalance can create a quiet tension on paradise worlds. The culture of these planets outwardly is one of grace, civility, and joy. But behind the polite smiles of a servant handing a fresh towel to a noble, there could be generational grudges. Some planetary worker families doubtless have stories. Great-grandfather was flogged to death when the Duke thought he had stolen a bottle of wine. It wasn't true. Officially, everything is perfect. Unofficially, the commoners have to swallow a lot of indignities to keep the paradise running. Most do so, but occasionally there may be breaking points, which we'll explore when we discuss outright outbreaks of heresy or revolt. Decadence also breeds complacency and sloth. Why toil when everything is available at a finger's snap? Many inhabitants of paradise worlds, particularly the transient rich, lose their edge. Military officers on extended leave here might get soft in the belly and slow in reflexes. Noble heirs raised on a garden planet might have only a nominal education in warfare or politics, spending more time on horseback riding and attending galas than learning statecraft or strategy. There are cautionary tales of Imperial commanders who stayed too long in luxury and became ineffective at their duties when they returned to real conditions. A certain amount of rejuvenation is healthy, but overindulgence dulls the senses and the will. In the nightmare context of 40k, dull senses and willful ignorance are perilous. A paradise world population so used to peace and pleasure may simply not be ready when danger strikes. Imagine a planet that hasn't seen conflict in centuries. Its PDF, Planetary Defense Force, mostly ceremonial. When suddenly a threat emerges, a cult uprising or a pirate raid, the defenders are sluggish, disorganized, perhaps even cowardly, unaccustomed to actual combat. The nobles themselves, who might fancy themselves sportsmen for hunting groks on estates, could freeze or flee when confronted by a genuine predator, like a chaos space marine or a tyrannid horror. There is a saying, in paradise they forgot how to fight. This is not universally true. Some paradise worlds do train seriously, like those with warrior retreats. But generally, a long peace can erode readiness. And peace there is relative anyway. The appearance of no war or want doesn't mean conflict is entirely absent. On many paradise worlds, conflict simply takes a more subtle form. Intrigue and vice. Noble houses feuding might resort to quiet assassinations, disguised as accidents during a hunt or poison slipped in a banquet wine. The weapons are silken garrotes in the night, not bolt guns at dawn. Vendettas can play out in social slights or ruinous gossip rather than open confrontation, which would disturb the atmosphere. Meanwhile, those in service or the underclass might engage in petty rebellions, theft of expensive goods, sabotage of a pompous lord's prized garden, secret gatherings where they mock their masters behind closed doors. These are small personal wars of resentment that rarely surface publicly until they reach a breaking point. We also cannot ignore one grim truth. Where there is extreme excess, chaos finds a foothold. This is the dark flip side of decadence on paradise worlds, and perhaps the greatest danger lurking under the idyllic surface. The chaos god Slanesh, known as the Prince of Pleasure, finds fertile ground in the indulgences and sensations that flood these planets. When nobles tire of normal pleasures, they seek new heights of experience. Today's sumptuous feast becomes mundane tomorrow, so perhaps they spice the food with obscenely rare spices or narcotics for a novel thrill. The music at the ball is not exciting enough, so they hire zenos performers or sanction strange sonic drugs. The parties become more and more hedonistic, breaking taboos, exploring forbidden desires, all in the name of avoiding boredom. Unknowingly, they edge into Slaneshi territory. A secret society might form among the bored aristocrats, promising the ultimate delights, which in truth are chaos rites gradually ensnaring their souls. Indeed, it's practically a cliché that many pleasure worlds hide one or more Slanesh cults among the upper crust. These cults can start almost innocently, a clique of nobles gathering to sample a new drug or to perform an eroticized ritual for excitement. But chaos corrupts swiftly. What begins as a thrill club can transform into a full-blown chaos coven, complete with sacrificial orgies, invocation of demons of excess, and utter moral degradation. There are known incidents. A paradise world hosting a season of decadent festivities, only for the finale to turn into a nightmare when revelers, having unknowingly partaken in sorcerous elixirs, suddenly tear off their civilized veneer and engage in acts of unspeakable depravity and violence under the influence of a summoned daemonette. By dawn, the banquet hall is a charnel house, and those who survive are either mentally broken or irredeemably corrupted. Only then does the Ordo Hereticus, the branch of the Inquisition that hunts heretics and cults, swoop in to purge and cover up the incident, for the wider Imperium must not hear that the sector's paragons turned into chaos worshippers overnight. It's not only the nobles. Servants and lower classes on paradise worlds can also fall to chaos, albeit often for different reasons. While the rich pursue pleasure to excess, the downtrodden might fall prey to chaos out of resentment or despair. Imagine being a servant whose entire life is to bow and scrape and never enjoy the fruits around you. Such a person might be drawn to a chaos cult that promises to overthrow the lords, or to grant them the power to taste the pleasures they've been denied. A Slanesh cult among servants could take the form of secret gatherings after hours where they share stolen luxuries and perform blasphemous rites that invert the social order. Maybe a ritual orgy where they wear masks parodying their masters, casting off all the imposed rules. It might begin as a form of revenge fantasy or compensatory indulgence, but chaos doesn't care for the motive, only that the acts feed its purpose. Before long, those servants might poison a few decadent nobles, not just out of anger, but as offerings to Slanesh, or commit increasingly daring acts of subversion in pursuit of forbidden sensations. Alternatively, the injustice on a paradise world could attract the attention of chaos cults of other stripes. A downtrodden underclass might turn to chaos. Undivided revolutionary cults that preach tearing down the oppressors, mixing in Khorne's wrath, and maybe Tzeentch's schemes. Or a particularly neglected corner of the paradise, say a slum of servants outside the beautiful capital, could become diseased or squalid, allowing Nurgle, chaos god of decay and despair, to fester there, offering solace in misery behind the facade of perfection. This would be the ultimate contrast, a hidden pocket of rot in Eden, where plague cultists pray to the grandfather, Nurgle, for deliverance from their pain, even as the rulers dance in denial up the hill. Chaos cult infiltration on paradise worlds is a critical hidden aspect and a known issue for the Inquisition and local authorities. The irony that the best places to live often breed some of the worst heresies is not lost on them. In fact, inquisitors sometimes suspect paradise worlds more than normal worlds when it comes to corruption, precisely because the people there have the time, wealth, and hubris to dabble in the forbidden. A hive world might have widespread heresy among its downtrodden, but a pleasure world might incubate a very insidious, high-level heresy that could spread through the nobility like a cancer across many planets, if not checked. If the governor of a paradise world becomes a Slaaneshi cult high priest, he might corrupt visiting officials from other worlds via temptations at lavish parties, sending them back tainted. Thus, a single pleasure planet cult could theoretically compromise the leadership of an entire subsector before anyone realizes a nightmare scenario for the Imperium. But not only chaos exploits paradise worlds, Zenos infiltrators may also find opportunities here. The Drukhari, dark Eldar, pirates who live for exquisite suffering, occasionally raid pleasure worlds because they present soft, delicious targets. Unarmored aristocrats whose pain brings rich psychic flavors. Some dark elder cabals specifically target these worlds, slipping in during a grand festival and abducting hundreds of revelers in one fell swoop, considering it the finest sport. What could be more amusing to a sadistic alien than turning a place of delight into a scene of terror? Meanwhile, genestealer cults, insidious infections of tyrannid bioforms that infiltrate human society, could in theory take root among servant classes or disaffected locals. A paradise world might not have the dense populace genestealers prefer, but if one got planet-side, the complacency of authorities might let it spread quietly. A butler here, a gardener there, each secretly turned into a host that worships the coming of the Tyranids as salvation. They might reason that the highborn treat them like dirt, so why not embrace an alien god that promises a new egalitarian order, albeit one where all are devoured in the end? The cult could remain hidden for a long time behind the facade of obedient service, until one day, perhaps the annual Grand Ball, the steward and half the waitstaff suddenly reveal extra limbs and attack the stunned nobility in a prelude to summoning their alien masters. Even the Eldar, Eldari, have a connection. Many paradise worlds were once maiden worlds planets, terraformed by the ancient Eldar to be paradises for their own kind. The Imperium might have stumbled on these beautiful, empty planets and claimed them, not realizing they were gardens planted by someone else. There are rumors that some Eldar exquisites, a faction that lives on maiden worlds in harmony with nature, were wiped out or displaced by human colonists turning their home into an imperial pleasure world. This is a recipe for vengeance. Eldar, both the noble craft-worlders and the vengeful outcasts, might strike a paradise world with sudden fury if they realize humans are polluting their once sacred land. From their view, even living on it is pollution. A serene world could see blades and arrows in the dark, as Eldar rangers or assassins pick off key individuals, sowing fear, or even orchestrate disasters, like guiding a wild animal stampede into a villa to make the humans leave their paradise. If a far seer, Eldar seer, determines that reclaiming a maiden world is feasible, they might manipulate events to cause such chaos, maybe exacerbating a local cult, that the Imperium abandons or quarantines the planet. Then the Eldar slip back in. Thus, behind some paradise worlds may loom an alien claim that one day could come knocking. In summary, beneath the gilded surface of paradise worlds lies a web of social inequality, moral decay, and hidden threats. The outward utopia is maintained by the unceasing labor of an underclass and the careful denial of any unpleasantness by those in charge. But in those blind spots, darkness germinates, whether in the form of discontent, indulgence gone mad, or the literal touch of chaos. It is a classic example of the Warhammer 40k theme, a beautiful facade hiding corruption within. And the more perfect the facade, the more shocking it is when the truth comes spilling out in blood and fire. We now turn to how the Imperium deals with these dangers and the roles of its various agents in both preserving and, when necessary, purging paradise. Guardians and exploiters, Inquisition, nobles, and other factions. Maintaining a paradise world as a paradise is not a passive affair. Various factions within the Imperium have stakes in these planets, some as protectors, some as exploiters, often both at once. Their interplay determines whether a pleasure world remains a shining gem or succumbs to its darker impulses. Let's examine how key Imperial institutions and groups interact with paradise worlds. The noble houses and planetary governors. We've discussed nobles at length as the primary benefactors of paradise worlds. Many such worlds are effectively the private fiefs of powerful noble houses or consortiums of nobles. The planetary governor of a paradise world is often a hereditary monarch or aristocrat whose family owns much of the planet's land. For example, House so-and-so may have been granted a charter to rule the planet centuries ago. They in turn parcel out estates to other allied nobles or sell vacation manors to wealthy off-worlders. These governors tend to be extremely wealthy, well-connected, and protective of their domain's special status. They walk a fine line. They must keep imperial authorities satisfied that the world is under control and worth its exemption, while also keeping their high-class clientele happy and maintaining the illusion of paradise. Noble rulers of paradise worlds can be benevolent or tyrannical, but even the kindliest have an interest in keeping the lower orders firmly in place, for the sake of stability and appearances. Some might genuinely care for their small population, ensuring the local folk are well-fed, educated in polite arts, and content, as content workers make for a harmonious paradise. Others might be decadent monsters behind closed doors, treating their servants brutally but concealing it when off-world guests arrive. Either way, they will resist outside interference fiercely. If, say, a new Administratum official suggested establishing a mining outpost on their world, the governor will muster all their influence and bribe whatever officials needed to quash that idea. They likely attend sector conferences and petition the sector governor or segmentum authorities to maintain the special tithe status. Many Paradise World lords essentially operate via patronage networks. They provide favors and hospitality to other powerful figures in exchange for political protection. Thus, a planetary governor of a paradise might have an understanding with a nearby Forge World Magos. You ensure the Mechanicus doesn't request any surveys here, and I'll send you 10 barrels of our best wine annually and invite you to hunt on my estate each summer. It's all very feudal and personal. However, should a paradise world's leadership become compromised by heresy, rebellion, etc., these same nobles can become the root of the problem. A treasonous governor might turn their paradise into a personal kingdom, rejecting imperial tithe entirely, using the world's defenses and wealth to hold off the Imperium and live in isolated splendor, or to invite illicit allies, like a chaos warband, to protect them. Historically, there have been a few cases of pleasure world rulers going rogue, though they tend not to last long once discovered. The Imperium will not tolerate secession, no matter how jewel-like the world. But often, if a purge is needed, it's surgical. Remove the bad noble, install a new one who is loyal, perhaps a cousin or rival house eager to take over the estates. The threat of losing such a comfortable position is usually enough to keep most nobles in line. Fear of the Inquisition also helps, which brings us to the Inquisition. The Imperial Inquisition is ever vigilant against heresy, mutation, and corruption. Paradise worlds, as discussed, can be hotbeds of subtle heresy. The Inquisition knows this well. Thus, many paradise worlds likely have one or more inquisitorial agents keeping an eye on things, especially those worlds with a history of problems. These agents might be undercover, posing as servants or low-ranking nobility. It's quite conceivable that the friendly new sommelier serving wine at the governor's banquet is actually an inquisitorial informant, watching for any hint of cult activity among the guests. Or that the seemingly innocuous travel painter who has been capturing landscapes around the planet is in fact a member of the Ordo Hereticus, observing the local priesthood for signs of deviation. When the Inquisition uncovers true corruption, their response can range from discreet cleansing to overt action. In a best-case scenario, if a small chaos cult is found among the servants, an inquisitor might quietly coordinate with a handful of trusted local law enforcers to round up and execute the cultists in the dead of night, with none of the tourists any the wiser. The society continues the next day as if nothing happened, except a few missing staff explained away neatly. In more dire cases, say the ruling family is entirely given over to Slaanesh, the Inquisition might orchestrate a silent coup. Perhaps the corrupt nobles are invited off-world to an elite gathering and then arrested or assassinated away from their power base. Then the Inquisition installs a more pliant relative to govern, with a stern warning to mend the family's ways. All done hush-hush, so the world doesn't panic and the image of paradise remains unsullied. However, if a paradise world falls deep into heresy or is invaded by a hostile force, chaos, zenos, the Inquisition will not hesitate to sanction extreme measures. Exterminatus, the utter destruction of a planet's life, is the last resort. One might think the Imperium would balk at destroying a world of great beauty and wealth, but if that beauty has been irrevocably tainted, they absolutely will. There is the notable example of Rothanon, once a paradise world with nearly 2 billion souls, which was subjected to exterminatus for reasons lost to common knowledge, but likely a chaos infestation given the sources. The Inquisition would rather see a paradise reduced to a charred cinder than let it become a wellspring of demonry or a pleasure garden for heretics. Similarly, a Tyrannid invasion or major demonic incursion would prompt them to sterilize the planet if victory is unattainable or the corruption can't be purged by conventional means. The Ordo Zenos, branch of Inquisition dealing with aliens, might be concerned if, for instance, Eldar activity is sensed, or if Zenos artifacts are rumored on the world, especially if it was a maiden world. They might conduct clandestine hunts for those artifacts, or set traps for dark Eldar raiders. The Ordo Hereticus focuses on cults and moral corruption, probably the busiest on these worlds. The Ordo Malleus, demon hunters, would intervene if a demonic presence is uncovered, possibly sending in elite units like the Grey Knights, demon-hunting space marines, under utmost secrecy to eliminate a nascent daemonic cult before it rages out of control. For all these reasons, inquisitors sometimes take a personal interest in paradise worlds beyond mere duty. Some might even enjoy their work there a bit. An inquisitor who has spent years slogging through battlefields and hive sewers might relish an assignment to investigate possible heresy on the paradise world of so-and-so, because, well, at least they'll be doing it from a comfortable villa as opposed to a trench. This isn't to say they let their guard down, but there's an anecdote in some circles that inquisitors will volunteer readily for cases on pleasure planets. This little hint of humor aside, they remain one of the critical checks on the darkness that can bloom in these beautiful corners. Without the Inquisition's fearsome reputation looming in the background, it's likely many more Paradise World elites would succumb to temptation. The knowledge that, if we go too far, the Inquisition will come for us, keeps a lot of powerful people from crossing certain lines. Most of the time. The Adeptus Arbites, Imperial lawkeepers. Every Imperial world nominally has Arbites presence. These are enforcers of Imperial law, separate from local police, who handle high crimes like sedition, major disorder, and ensuring tithe compliance. On a paradise world, the Arbites typically have a smaller footprint than on a hive world. After all, population is low and violent crime might be rare, or kept hidden. But they are there, often in a fortress precinct outside the main resort areas. They keep an eye on any potential large-scale disturbances. If the local populace ever tried to revolt, or if off-world visitors caused trouble that threatened Imperial interests, the Arbites would intervene with shock and awe. They may also assist the Inquisition if requested, or handle cases of internoble violence that gets out of hand, though as mentioned, nobles often pressure them to stay out of private matters. Arbites should technically be impartial and above local influence, but in practice, cunning governors find ways to divert them unless the case is an outright imperial concern. Arbites on paradise worlds might find themselves doing more investigative work on smuggling or security threats from outside. For example, a pleasure planet might attract smugglers who bring in illegal goods, obscene drugs, zenos, pleasure devices, etc., to cater to depraved tastes. The Arbites would try to shut that down to maintain order and avoid giving the Inquisition reasons to probe. They also likely vet and monitor incoming vessels to ensure, say, no known cultists or dangerous persons slip in disguised as tourists. In essence, they act as the stern lifeguards of the swimming pool, making sure nobody spikes the water with poison. The Adeptus Mechanicus. The Mechanicus is an interesting stakeholder. Generally, they have little open presence on pleasure worlds, since there's minimal industry. However, Mechanicus tech is still needed. Power generators, atmospheric regulators, if any, cogitator systems running estates, security systems, etc., all need Mechanicus oversight. Likely, the Mechanicus has a small delegation or Mechanicum priest assigned to each paradise world to tend its technology. Perhaps an estate technologist, or a whole minor order of tech priests specialized in maintaining luxury tech like climate control machines for artificial indoor beaches, or keeping the anti-aging rejuvenat equipment of nobles running. They probably chafe at the frivolous use of tech. Imagine a devout tech priest being ordered to ensure the holographic ballroom floor projects correctly for the governor's dance, when he'd much rather be fabricating bolter shells. Still, they do their duty. Behind the scenes, the Mechanicus might keep sensors on the planet's resources. They might scan for any archaeotech or STC fragments, standard template constructs, holy grails of technology, lurking undeveloped. If a paradise world was once a dark age of technology experiment, Some are rumored to be terraforming projects of old. The Mechanicus absolutely wants to study that, even if clandestinely. There could be tension if the Mechanicus requests permission to drill a core sample or excavate ruins. The nobles might resist anything that could upset their lawn, so to speak. Sometimes deals are struck. The Mechanicus gets to set up a small research outpost in some remote corner to study whatever piece of tech or geology interests them, in exchange for providing the planet with high-end tech luxuries, or not objecting to its low tithe. One noteworthy scenario: if a paradise world has some unique technological system, for instance, an ancient atmospheric generator making the climate perfect, the Mechanicus might practically worship that machine. They'd insist on maintaining it directly, likely restricting who can even approach it. This could cause friction if, say, the machine is located near a noble's favorite garden, and he doesn't want grease-stained tech adepts tramping through. But ultimately, few challenge the Mechanicus on tech matters for long. In a crisis, Mechanicus personnel might be the ones to, for example, shut down a planet's power grid if a demonic infestation spreads through the noosphere data network, or rig self-destruct on key facilities to stop their misuse. The Ecclesiarchy, Imperial Cult Church. Religion does not take a break on paradise worlds. There will be chapels and cathedrals, though often they are picturesque. A beautiful chapel by a lake, a grand cathedral of white marble in the capital city, rather than the dark, Gothic edifices of hive cities. The populace is expected to attend worship and thank the god emperor for their fortunate lives. In fact, religious festivals on paradise worlds can be quite elaborate and celebratory, contrasting with the grim penitence seen on harsher worlds. For example, on the day of Emperor's Ascension, instead of self-flagellation and marches, a pleasure world might hold a glorious choral concert in the open air, with floating lanterns released into the sky and a feast given to the poor, the few poor they have. It's all very uplifting and potentially superficial. The Ecclesiarchy sees paradise worlds as double-edged. On one hand, they are proof of the Emperor's grace, so they should be cherished. On the other, they know idle luxury can weaken faith. The local ministorum priests likely preach constantly against sloth and excess, urging nobles to donate generously and remember their duties. Some firebrand confessors may occasionally arise, thundering from pulpits that the nobles are flirting with damnation through their decadence. This could spark some conflict. A too enthusiastic preacher could find himself quietly reassigned, or have an accident, if he embarrasses the governor at a public sermon by calling out sin in the court. Yet, if the ecclesiarchy perceives that a paradise world is sliding into widespread impiety or heresy, they might send missionaries or even a zealot movement to correct it. An interesting dynamic, the case of Reth we saw, where a zealous family took over and tried to reform a pleasure planet's culture to be more pious. The Decadence dynasty essentially said, "Enough decadence, we need to instill fear of the emperor's judgment." They established stricter religious practices, which presumably made the world less fun for visiting hedonists but more acceptable to the Puritan mindset. This shows that sometimes internal crusades of morality happen on paradise worlds. The ecclesiarchy might sponsor such takeovers if they feel a world is a spiritual weak link. Of course, that can backfire if the result is a joyless society. The wealthy might stop coming, and the planet loses its purpose as a pleasure hub. There's a balance, a bit of piety and structure to keep chaos at bay, but not so much that the place stops being enjoyable for its patrons. One might cynically suggest the ecclesiarchy itself likes having some paradise postings. Imagine a high cardinal enjoying a working pilgrimage to a garden world shrine, which conveniently lets him spend a season in comfort. So the church can both exploit enjoying the fruits, using the planet for retreats, and guard, watching for moral decay, these worlds. If a cult arises, the local clergy might be first to notice unusual attendance or strange behavior among the flock. A good priest could tip off the Inquisition or rally loyal citizens to quell minor blasphemies. Alternatively, a corrupt priest could be the worst of all. If an archdeacon on a paradise world falls to temptation, he could provide a veneer of legitimacy to a Slaanish cult by twisting scripture to say, the emperor wants us to enjoy all aspects of life fully, luring more into depravity. The Imperial Guard and Navy. While not permanently stationed on paradise worlds, no guard regiments are typically raised solely from these low-population planets, aside from perhaps a token ceremonial unit. These military forces interact as visitors. We touched on how R&R might happen for units. Additionally, a paradise world could be a logistics or command hub if situated in a quiet zone. Generals might use its peace to plan wars. We can imagine a high command conference held at an estate far from prying ears, where top brass plan a crusade in comfort rather than in a tent on the front. There's a pragmatic angle. Sometimes getting generals away from immediate crises helps them think strategically, but it also could dull their sense of urgency. Military personnel with time on paradise worlds often adopt a garrison mindset. It's a safe posting, and some might start to prefer it to the point of avoiding returning to war. This is dangerous for careers. The Munitorum, military administration, might rotate staff off if they suspect paradise fatigue. The Navy likely uses orbital docks around some pleasure planets, like Reth's orbital casino station, doubling as a docking port. Naval officers might invest personally in these worlds. Some retired admirals purchase estates and effectively join the local nobility after service, which then means they have ties to active officers who come to visit. This old boys network can be beneficial, coordinating defense of the region, or troublesome if they collectively become soft or politically entangled. One cannot ignore the Space Marines entirely. Though not commonly associated with hedonism, some chapters have notable characters or events tied to paradise worlds. For instance, the Blood Angels chapter, Master Dante, famously defended a paradise world. In lore, he saved a world called Sacrament from a chaos rebellion, if memory serves, or something similar. Space Marines typically do not linger on such planets, but if a paradise world falls under attack or corruption, having these angels of death descend amidst a setting of beauty is a dramatic contrast. Picture the white sands of a beach stained with the blood of demons as ultramarines fight to save a retreat villa used by their own chapter's veterans. If Space Marines do have any permanent presence, it might be a small hermitage where a few veterans dwell in contemplation. Perhaps a dreadnought entombed hero set to rest in a pleasant vale. The local civilians would view them as mysterious holy warriors on the hill, part of the planet's scenery of imperial glory, but not interacting day to day. The common folk and their potential for resistance. We should also mention how, aside from turning to chaos, common folk might respond to inequality in more loyalist ways. If pushed too far by noble abuses, they might appeal to the imperial authorities, writing petitions to the sector governor or seeking out an arbitus judge to complain of maltreatment. Usually, these pleas fall on deaf ears or are buried by local authorities. A more dramatic response might be forming a secret society not of heresy, but of justice, perhaps inspired by an off-world imperial creed teaching about the emperor's care for all. There could be a peasant rebel movement aiming to kidnap a notoriously cruel noble and deliver him to the Arbites for punishment, thinking that surely the distant emperor's law would side with the righteous. In 40k, this often ends tragically. The petitioners are executed for sedition. the Arbites ides with the nobles' property rights. But the attempt might still happen, a last act of desperation by those who love their world's beauty but hate their suffering within it. Some commoners, rather than rebel, might seek escape. However, leaving a paradise world is not easy. Passage off-world is expensive and often restricted. The nobles don't want their servants running off. But a few might stow away on ships or plead to join the Imperial Guard just to get out and see a different life, ironically going from paradise to war volunteering. Those few who leave might spread tales of the paradise, which in turn could cause discontent on other worlds if believed. The Imperium likely clamps down on such stories. It wouldn't do for a factory worker on a forge world to hear that on Planet X they have feasts every night while you toil. In all, the factions of the Imperium both sustain and exploit paradise worlds, each according to their interests. Nobles cling to privilege, the Inquisition polices sin, the Arbites enforce order, the ecclesiarchy tends the soul, and the mechanicus tends the machines and eyes any hidden tech. It's a microcosm of the Imperium's feudal nature compressed onto a single idyllic stage. And inevitably, sometimes the play on that stage turns into real tragedy, which leads us to our next topic. What happens when paradise fails? Paradise Lost, Downfall and Darkness. The question was posed. Paradise worlds the best place to live in the Imperium, or are they? To truly answer it, we must look at those instances when a so-called paradise world showed its true colors or met a terrible fate. History and Warhammer 40k lore provides several cautionary tales of paradise worlds that were not only not the best places to live, but became sites of horror, heresy, or destruction. Here, we recount and analyze a few such cases, some drawn from chronicles, others speculative but emblematic, to illustrate the perils that hang over these gardens of pleasure. The Masquerade of Cuadis. Decadence to damnation. Cuadis is a name that lives in infamy among inquisitors of the Calixis sector. This world was a celebrated pleasure planet, famed for its wines and its grand city of Sikarf, a metropolis of marble, gold, and glow globes, where it was said the sun never truly set on the festivities. The nobility of an entire sector would gather on Cuadis for an event known as the Festival of Tattered Fates, a once-in-a-generation masquerade carnival reputed to be the most extravagant party in the Imperium. For nights on end, the elite danced, gambled, and indulged in every luxury under the sky of Cuadis, their identities hidden behind ornate masks, social distinctions temporarily dissolved in revelry. But behind the fireworks and flowing amasec, a terrible plot was unfolding. A chaos cult dedicated to Slaanesh had long infiltrated the highest circles of Cuadis' society, and the festival was to be the stage for their apotheosis. As the festival reached its climax, the revelers found themselves swept into a ritual unknowingly. The culmination of every excess was an orgiastic ceremony to summon a host of Slaaneshi demons into their midst. At midnight, when twin moons aligned, the thin veneer of reality in Sikarf ripped open. The masked ball turned into a massacre. Dancers in silk gowns and feathered masks screamed as lithe, razor-clawed demonettes materialized among them, each one a vision of terrifying beauty, and began to slaughter and exult. Noblemen drunk on pleasure thought it part of the entertainment until they were torn limb from limb. The city's hidden underworks, bloodsport arenas, and pleasure dens disgorged cultists who had been preparing in secret, now armed and openly serving their dark prince. In the chaos, thousands died in mere hours. It was only through the intervention of a band of inquisitorial acolytes and the arrival of the Ordo Hereticus strike teams that the situation was contained. Dawn found Shekarf devastated, its courtyards littered with the mangled remains of what had been the sector's richest and most powerful. Cuadis lost its innocence that night. The world was thereafter quarantined for a time by the Inquisition, who scrubbed records and executed any surviving cult conspirators. Though eventually it returned to use as a pleasure world, the Imperium has short memory for the sins of the highborn. The Masquerade of Cuadis became a grim legend, a stark reminder that paradise can turn to hell in a single night of corruption. Ispotua, feast for the devourer. Not all dooms come from within. Some strike from the stars. Ispotua was once a quiet paradise world on the fringe of Imperial space, an idyll of emerald forests and placid lakes. It had no standing army to speak of, only a ceremonial PDF and a handful of orbital defenses. When the Tyranids came, the extragalactic hive fleet, Leviathan Ispotua's residents, could scarcely comprehend their fate. At first, strange meteor showers were seen, in truth, spore pods landing. Communication with off-world authorities was slow. By the time an astropath's plea for help was heard, the Tyranid swarm had descended. In a matter of days, this paradise was transformed into a nightmare landscape. The Tyranids consumed everything. Living jungles were stripped to barren ground, herds of gentle animals devoured to the bone. And the people? They were biomass to be harvested. Peaceful villas became feeding grounds for chittering swarms of gaunts. The shallow onyx-shard gardens, famed crystal-lined fields, were churned into mud under the tread of grotesque bio-titans. The ruling nobles and lucky few tried to flee via shuttle. Some escaped, many were caught and torn apart as they ran. Resistance was almost nil. A handful of game hunters and security forces made a desperate last stand at the governor's summer palace, but courage alone could not stop the zenos' tide. In orbit, salvation finally arrived in the form of the Space Marines of the Iron Hands chapter. They had pursued the splinter of Leviathan to Ispotua and engaged the Tyranid fleet in a furious void battle. Drop pods rained and Iron Hands descended to the surface, bolters roaring. After brutal fighting, they exterminated the Tyranid ground forces, and the hive ships were destroyed overhead. Ispotua was saved from total consumption. Technically. Yet, what was left to save? The planet that had been a paradise was irreversibly scarred. Its lush ecosystems gnawed down to barren sludge in large swaths, its beauty scorched and trampled in war. Those human survivors who hadn't been eaten were traumatized beyond words, a few hundred souls blinking in shock amid the ruins of heaven. In the aftermath, Ispotua was deemed no longer a paradise, its classification stripped. It became just another devastated world, a footnote in the tyrannic wars. The irony was clear. All the Emperor's protection, all the wealth and privilege could not spare it when the jaws of the galaxy closed around it. For other paradise worlds, the lesson was ominous. Without vigilance and fortification, they too could become a feast for whatever horror comes next. IAX. The Garden of Ultramar, Wilts. Within the realm of Ultramar, say, the domain of the Ultramarines chapter, IAX was known as the Garden of Ultramar, a dual agri-world and paradise of considerable renown. Gentle rolling plains and orchards fed Ultramar's population, while its healing retreats and hospices were legendary for curing the injured and ill. Under Robuta Guillemon's enlightened rule, both in the 31st millennium and his return in the 41st, IX stood as a beacon of what human worlds could aspire to, productive yet beautiful, orderly yet serene. However, during the events of the Plague Wars, the Chaos God Nurgle, Lord of Decay, cast his eye on IAX. In a twisted plan to spite Guilliman, the demon Primarch Mortarion and his Death Guard traitor legion invaded Ultramar, focusing their rot on IAX itself. The Garden of Ultramar became ground zero for the most noxious plagues ever unleashed. Crops withered into black slime. The hospices that once healed became charnel houses of contagion as patients rose from their beds as plague zombies, attacking caregivers in a cannibal frenzy. The air that once carried the scent of blossoms stank of corpse gas and filth. IAX, in effect, was transformed into a grotesque parody of itself. The lush world turned into a garden of Nurgle, an open-air breeding ground for diseases that defied even advanced Medicaid treatments. The Ultramarines and their allies fought desperately to stem the corruption, and titanic battles were waged across the planet's blighted fields. Eventually, after great sacrifice, the Imperials halted the Death Guard and banished many of the demons, but IAX was left tainted beyond immediate repair, its status as a paradise utterly destroyed. Once a haven, it had become a death world where remnants of Nurgle's plagues still spawned twisted life in the fetid swamps that were once fertile earth. Perhaps in centuries hence it can be restored, but for now it stands as a sobering example. Even under a Space Marine Primarch's protection, a paradise can be laid low by the foul hand of chaos. If it can happen to IAX, no world, no matter how favored, is truly safe. The Fall of Rapture Knightly Glory. Undone. Rapture was a peculiar paradise world, unique in that it was also a night world, home to a noble house that fielded night titans, gigantic combat walkers piloted by aristocratic warriors. House Aramos ruled Rapture, and for many years they maintained the planet both as their feudal domain and as a garden sanctuary. Tourists from nearby sectors would come to see the breathtaking crystal falls of Rapture or the famous Thousand Perfumes gardens that the Night Scions cultivated when not off fighting in their war machines. House Aramos took pride in balancing duty and beauty. They saw themselves as chivalric guardians of a literal paradise. Tragically, during a brewing civil war in the Segmentum, some say it was influenced by Tsunch, the chaos god of change and treachery, House Aramos was split by internal betrayal. One faction of the family made a pact, either with chaos or out of sheer ambition, to turn against their own kin. In a night of fire, several night suits rampaged across the capital city, bombarding it and dueling their loyalist brethren. The Paradise World's night was lit up by thermal cannon blasts and the collapse of elegant spires under giant mechanical feet. In the end, the traitors fled off-world with their knights, effectively turning to renegades. Rapture was left in ruins, its ruling house decimated. A beautiful world, but now without the knights to protect it or rule it. The Imperium eventually classified it as a dead world. Whether it was physically destroyed or simply abandoned is unclear, but presumably the devastation and loss of leadership rendered it untenable as a paradise. Betrayal from within the very knightly guardians led to the downfall, showing that even honor-bound protectors can falter due to human or superhuman greed and corruption. The best place to live became the worst place to die for many of Rapture's inhabitants caught in that colossal crossfire. Servants uprising on Celaria. Invented scenario. Not every downfall is galaxy-shaking or famous in tomes of history. Some are small tragedies. Consider the little-known case of Celaria, a minor paradise world in a remote sector. Celaria had no huge strategic value, just an idyllic island-dotted ocean planet owned by a coalition of noble houses. Its downfall came not from aliens or open heresy, but from the slow burn of social injustice, reaching a tipping point. For decades, the household servants and local farmers of Celaria endured their lot, watching their off-world masters throw lavish yachting parties and opera festivals each season. while they labored invisibly. Perhaps it was one beating too many, or a particularly cruel governor's heir who had a taste for torment that triggered it. The common people snapped. In an event later suppressed by the Administratum, a large group of servants and laborers orchestrated a revolt during the annual summer solstice gala. While the gentry were distracted by fireworks over the bay, the servants armed with kitchen knives, tools, and a few stolen las pistols attacked. It was a brief, bloody spasm of class violence. Dozens of nobles were killed, their mansions set ablaze, guests fleeing in panic through rose gardens now lit by burning pergolas. The rebels, for a moment, took control of the main resort city. They reportedly proclaimed an end to feudal rule on Silaria, shouting that the paradise belonged to those who worked it. Of course, the Imperium's wrath was swift. Within days, a detachment of Tempestus Scions, elite stormtroopers, arrived from a neighboring system, acting on the orders of an outraged sector governor who himself vacationed on Silaria. The Scions, backed by local PDF loyalists, stormed the city and massacred the rebels with professional efficiency. Silaria's brief uprising was crushed utterly. In its wake, the charred bodies of both servants and nobles littered the beaches. The sector authorities rebuilt what they could, imported new servants, since many of the locals were dead or exiled, and installed a new governor. Official records described it blandly as a minor worker agitation put down by loyal forces. But those few who know the truth mark Silaria as a moral downfall, a paradise stained by the blood of injustice, a case where the Imperium's best place to live was so only for some, and the rest could only take so much. Each of these cases, from chaos corruption to zenos attack to internal strife, underlines a simple reality. Paradise worlds are not immune to the grim fate that stalks humanity elsewhere. In fact, when catastrophe strikes a paradise world, it often strikes harder in effect, because these places are so ill-prepared to cope. A hive world might weather a rebellion via sheer manpower. A fortress world might repel an invasion with its prepared defenses. But a paradise world, by its very nature, lacks these buffers. So, when the blow comes, it is devastating. The legendary saying of the 41st millennium is, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war." Paradise worlds are the exception that prove the rule. They try to exist without war, without darkness, but in doing so, perhaps they paint a target on themselves. They dare to shine in a night that hates the light, and inevitably, whether from within or without, that night comes for them. Conclusion: a gilded cage in a cruel galaxy. So, are paradise worlds the best place to live in the Imperium? On the surface, unquestionably yes. If you had to choose a world to be born on as an Imperial citizen, you'd be a fool not to pick a paradise world, assuming you could be among the privileged there. Who wouldn't want to live under gentle skies, amidst beauty and culture, rather than in a toxic hive slum or on a battle-scarred rock? Life on a paradise world, for the fortunate, is a life of ample food, relative safety, and refined leisure, things vanishingly rare for humanity at large. These worlds are testaments to what humanity can achieve in pockets, even under the dystopian regime of the Imperium. A glimpse, perhaps, of the old dream of a golden age, where mankind lived in harmony with worlds of plenty. Yet, as we have seen, this coin has another face. Paradise. Worlds are paradoxes. They promise peace, but often harbor unseen war in the soul. They embody wealth and beauty, but depend on stark inequity and toil in the shadows. They inspire hope, but invite corruption. In many ways, a paradise world is a microcosm of the Imperium itself, a magnificent edifice built on a foundation of blood and fear. The high lords on Terra live in luxury, while countless trillions suffer. So too does the noble in his pleasure palace live off the sweat of unseen millions across the stars. One might call a paradise world a gilded cage. To those within the bubble of privilege, it is a cage of comfort. They become disconnected, perhaps even trapped by their own opulence, losing perspective and moral strength. To those in the lower rungs, it is a literal cage. Often they cannot leave, cannot aspire beyond servitude, all while being surrounded by what they can never have, except in scraps. And ultimately, the cage can become a trap for all when disaster strikes. Unlike a fortress, a paradise has little resilience. Its people, unaccustomed to hardship, may break when truly tested. Its leaders, if corrupt, may lead their whole world into damnation rather than sacrifice their indulgences. Yet, the Imperium cannot do without these worlds. They are the necessary illusion of the Imperial project, the idea that there is something worth fighting for beyond unending struggle. They are where heroes retire, where leaders recharge, where art and thought haven't yet been snuffed out. In a universe of brutality, the existence of paradise worlds says, this is what we fight to preserve, the memory of beauty, the possibility, however remote, of peace. That is powerful. And indeed, the common Imperial soldier might never see a paradise world, but he might imagine one as he marches through mud, clinging to that image to remind himself of why he holds the line. The truth, then, is nuanced. Paradise worlds are both the best and potentially the worst places to live in the Imperium. It depends on who you are, and it depends on the hour. For a favored noble on a calm day, it's a utopia. For a mistreated servant or a cornered citizen during a cult uprising, it's a personal hell made more tragic by the contrast with what it was before. And for those who have fallen into decadence or heresy there, the paradise becomes the antechamber to damnation. Standing on the edge of a paradise world's tranquil lake at sunset, one might feel a profound sense of melancholy. The scene is perfect. Golden light on the water, distant laughter from a villa, perhaps the bells of a distant chapel tolling the evening. And yet, knowing all we know, there's a heaviness in the air, the knowledge that this perfection is fragile, even false in places. In the back of one's mind lurks the question, how long can this last? In the Imperium, no paradise lasts forever. Sooner or later, war or time or the corruption of man will knock on the door. But perhaps what matters is that, despite everything, for a time these worlds do exist as havens. However brief their bloom, however costly their upkeep, they shine as rare stars in the darkness. A sane man might say the Imperium is damned for allowing such inequality and decadence. A pragmatist might answer that without these shining examples, the Imperium would be even worse, entirely drab, entirely hopeless. The argument rages in some form whenever men of conscience discuss it, quietly lest they be heard. In our narrative journey, we have peeled back the layers of these paradise worlds. We saw their glorious fronts, the luxury, the natural wonder, the exalted purpose of reprieve they serve. We also peered into their shadows, the downtrodden supporting cast, the moral decay, the ever-present threat of chaos and violence seeping in. The verdict, such as it is, might be expressed thus. A paradise world is the best place to live in the Imperium, until suddenly, horribly, it isn't. In the end, a paradise world is still an imperial world, and therefore subject to the same grim reality as all humanity. It is not a true Elysium free of care, but a fleeting mirage of one built on the labors and sacrifices of others. When we ask, or are they, the best place, we're really asking if the illusion holds. For some, all their life it will. They'll drink the wine, dance under the stars, and die peacefully in featherbeds with little knowledge of the nightmare beyond. For others, the illusion will shatter. maybe in a single cataclysmic night, or in quiet suffering that drives them to despair or revolt. As a narrator from outside with the cold perspective of history, I conclude with this Gothic truth-fitting of Warhammer 40,000's tone. Paradise worlds are beautiful lies, golden and gentle on the outside, and within, as human as anywhere else, which is to say, fraught with sin, cruelty, and peril. They are a whisper of what the Imperium could have been in a kinder universe, but also a reminder of why the Imperium can never truly have nice things last. And so we end our chronicle as we began, picturing that world of clear skies and golden shores. The sun sets in blood-red hues, for even the sunsets of paradise carry a hint of blood in 40k's aesthetic, and the first stars of night appear. It is calm, it is lovely. But as the camera of our mind's eye pulls back into the starry firmament, we see the broader galaxy, and it is aflame with war and turmoil. Against that backdrop, the paradise world is just a small, fragile bubble, one small target in a sea of threats. Tonight, all may be well in the paradise. Tomorrow, who can say? In the grim darkness of the far future, there are indeed places that call themselves paradise. But one must always add, or are they? The answer is as shifting as the clouds over their fair skies. But one thing is certain, those who dwell there forget the darkness at their peril. For paradise in the age of the Imperium is never more than one misstep away from perdition.